Today, we're diving into the incredible story of Xi Jinping. We're going to figure out how one man became China's most powerful leader since its revolutionary founder, the man himself, Mao Zedong. So the big question is, how did a guy who was once literally exiled by the Communist Party manage to rise up and command the whole thing? It's a heck of a story. And you know what? We're going to start near the end, with the exact moment his absolute power became undeniable to, well, pretty much the entire world.
All right, let's set the scene. We're looking at the 20th National Congress of the Chinese Communist Party. And this wasn't just another political meeting. This was an event that was about to shatter decades of precedent.
So, in October of 2022, the party is unveiling its top leaders for the next 5 years. Now, you gotta understand, this is pure political theater. Everything is carefully choreographed. But in all that ceremony, how do you know who really has the power? Well, it all comes down to one simple thing: the order they walk out on that stage. That order? It means absolutely everything. And guess who walked out first? For a historic third time, Xi Jinping. Now, this was huge because he'd already gotten rid of the presidential term limits, the very rules that stopped his predecessors from serving more than 2 terms. The signal was crystal clear. He wasn't planning on going anywhere. Maybe ever. And that's when you started hearing it everywhere. The world hasn't seen a Chinese leader like this since Mao Zedong. And you know what? That comparison is the whole key. To really get how Xi pulled this off, we have to go back in time. We have to understand the man who literally wrote the playbook for this kind of power, Mao Zedong. So let's hit rewind. We're going back to look at Mao's original playbook for power. We're going to see how he built the system that Xi would one day not just master, but completely remake in his own image. All right, so picture this. It's 1934, and the Communist Red Army is on the brink of being completely wiped out. They're forced into this brutal, year-long retreat that goes down in history as the Long March. At first, things are going horribly, catastrophic losses. So in a moment of desperation, who do they turn to? They hand leadership back to Mao Zedong, and it works. His guerrilla tactics, his strategy, it's credited with literally saving the army. And by the time that march was over, there was no question who was in charge. It was Mao. And this is where the story gets a wild personal twist. Remember that safe base where the handful of survivors finally found refuge? Well, the commander of that base, the man who offered Mao's starving army a safe haven, was none other than Xi Zongsun, Xi Jinping's father. The connection is right there from the very beginning. Okay, so how does power actually work in the Chinese Communist Party? Well, you have to look right at the very top. There's this super elite group, the Politburo Standing Committee. Think of them as the ultimate decision makers. They have supreme control over the party, the government, the military, everything. And after the Long March, this is exactly where Mao ended up, in total control of it all. But here's the masterstroke. Mao knew that controlling the army and the party wasn't enough. He seized ideological control too. His personal philosophy, Maoism, was officially declared the unquestioned guiding principle of the party. What does that mean? It means his ideas couldn't be challenged, they were fact. And just like that, his power went from huge to absolute. But that kind of absolute power, it had devastating consequences. And these weren't just abstract historical events. They would directly and brutally impact the life of a teenager named Xi Jinping. So, near the end of his rule, Mao unleashes the Cultural Revolution. It was this violent, chaotic attempt to purge any and all rivals and enforce total loyalty. And no one was safe, not even high-level officials and heroes of the revolution like Xi Jinping's own father, who was denounced, humiliated, and thrown in prison. And for his son, a 15-year-old Xi Jinping was kicked out of school, expelled from his home in Beijing, and sent to the countryside for years of backbreaking labor, living in a cave dwelling. So after Mao finally died, the party was basically traumatized. They'd seen what one man's absolute power could do. So under the next leader, Deng Xiaoping, they made a very deliberate change. They shifted away from Mao's cult of personality and absolute power and moved towards something totally different: collective leadership. The entire goal was to build a system with checks and balances to make sure that no single person could ever gain that much unchecked power again. Okay, so the party has set up this whole new system specifically to prevent another Mao from rising. So how on earth does Xi Jinping, the Princeling who was exiled to a cave, begin his patient climb right back to the very center of power? I mean, you really have to ask yourself, why would you join the very party that destroyed your family, that threw your father in jail and sent you to a labor camp? It seems to come down to a really cold, hard calculation. She must have realized a fundamental truth about China's system. Power is everything. If you want to survive, let alone change things, you have to get it. And his strategy for getting that power was brilliant and incredibly patient. He didn't stay in Beijing to fight it out in the political battlefield. No, he left. For the next 30 years, he just put his head down and worked his way up through the provinces. He took on leadership roles in poor, rural areas. He built powerful connections in the military. And piece by piece, he cultivated his own loyal base of supporters, all while staying far away from the spotlight. And this less ambitious, quiet reputation really paid off. After he was sent to clean up a big corruption scandal in Shanghai, the party elders started to see him as a safe bet. Sure, he was a princeling, from the revolutionary elite, but he didn't seem to have the sharp elbows of his rivals. And that perception, that he wouldn't rock the boat, that was his golden ticket. In 2007, it landed him a promotion to the Politburo Standing Committee, the absolute pinnacle of power. So, once he's at the top, what happens next? Well, in 2012, he becomes the head of the party, and he doesn't waste a single second. He immediately starts to systematically dismantle the very system of collective leadership that got him there in the first place. And it wasn't random. He had a playbook, a clear 4-step plan to seize total control. Step 1, launch a massive anti-corruption campaign. This was genius. The public loved it, and it was the perfect excuse to purge all of his rivals. Step 2, fill all those now empty jobs with his own hand-picked loyalists. Step 3, and this is straight from Mao's playbook. He introduced Xi Jinping Thought and made it unchallengeable party ideology. And the final step, Step 4, he amended the constitution and got rid of presidential term limits. Checkmate. And the outcome of all this? It was a total undoing of everything Deng Xiaoping had put in place. This massive purge left him with no real opposition, in the party or the military. He was now the most powerful leader the Chinese Communist Party had seen since the death of Mao. So that brings us to today. What does China actually look like in this new era, under a leader with basically no checks and balances on his power? Well, on one hand, the economy and military spending have more than doubled in just 10 years. China's foreign policy is way more assertive, especially in the South China Sea and with Taiwan. But there's another side to it. Internally, we've seen democratic processes stripped away in Hong Kong. We've seen widespread surveillance and censorship become the norm. There are documented human rights abuses against the Uyghur minority. And all of this pressure eventually led to something almost unheard of in China: rare public protests against his zero-COVID policy. And that brings us right back to where we started this whole story, at that 2022 Congress when Xi unveiled his new Politburo Standing Committee. It was completely packed with his loyalists. There was no one left to oppose him. The last little bits of other factions, just gone. His consolidation of power was, at that moment, totally complete. So there you have it. From a teenager exiled to a cave to the absolute ruler of a global superpower. It's an unbelievable journey. But it leaves us with a huge question, not just for China, but for everyone. With one man's power now totally secured, what does this new era in China really mean for the rest of the world?